Hello, everybody. I hope you're all keeping well in this age of, should we say, the age of strangeness. And well, it's a fluctuation. This is what we're going through the before the second Renaissance. Um, you don't have to respect black people. You don't have to respect white people. You don't have to respect purple people that have yellow polka dots. You don't have to respect any people. What you have to do is you show courtesy, kindness, and amiability to everyone. And from that, they either earn your respect or you ignore them. It's as simple as that. That's what it all comes down to. You judge the person, just like Martin Luther King said, by the content of their character and not by the colour of the skin. Unlike Black Lives Matter, who judge people entirely by the colour of their skin. So basically, they're running a black magic hex against what Martin Luther King said during the famous civil rights speech that cost him his life. So these people who were putting up the black squares on social media are racists because they're judging people not by the content of their character, but by the colour of their skin. The rest of us who didn't do it are not obsessed with skin colour like all these fake liberals are, and therefore we're very easygoing about people and we take everyone as neither a nice person, a good person, a bad person, or a great person. It doesn't matter to us what the colour of their skin is. But to a liberal, the ultimate racist on this earth, the colour of a person's skin determines everything they do in life, including to put a black square up on the page. Now, to compound this, the racial slave plantation is still very much active and out there. These days, they aren't square fields filled with tobacco and cotton. They are square boxes posted onto social media. That is their plantation. And with that plantation, they use the colour of black people's skin to not gather in tobacco or cotton, but to gather in virtue, to gather in sanctimonious platitudes, to gather in self-righteous finger-pointing. And that's what they do. So that's what they're basically doing. They put these black squares on their social media, and that is their virtue plantation. And just like in the old days, they go out and they go, black people, go out there and bring me back virtue. Bring me back sanctimony. Bring me back smugness, so I may demonstrate my wares of my plantation to my fellow slave owners. And that's what they see you as, a commodity. You remember that. When this is all over, and I don't have to tell most black people, because most black people are far more intelligent than all these, and see right through all these fakes with their black squares. It was demonstrated the other day when you had two white guys in two pasty-faced SJWs going in the window to a bunch of marchers, and they threw rocks at the window, quite rightly, and they were going, "We're on your side, dude! Cowabunga!" This kind of thing. They got a lesson in reality. Don't patronize people because of their skin colour, you racist. Now, and that's the true definition of racist. You see people entirely according to their skin colour and nothing else. You defile Martin Luther King's statement of the content of a person's character and not the colour of their skin. You only care about the colour of their skin. Now, so you send them out onto your virtual signalling plantation to gather up you virtue, smugness and accolades that you can then wear like a gilded garment among your contemporaries. And you're a horrible person for it. Now, to compound what a horrible person you are for it, an individual who shall not be named because, well, when he dies, there'll be no lamentation for him because he's nothing. He took the list of all the names of the people on the Thomas Sheridan appreciation page, Friends Hangout page on Facebook, and posted them to his wall saying that these people are all Trump supporters, i.e., we're racists. Now, in his psychotic episode of doing this, he forgot certain things. He left up the black people who are friends of mine, some of them for many years, who are my friends because they're cool, wonderful people, intelligent, decent, kind. And they're my friends not because the colour of their skin, but because of the content of their character. One of the first people at the top of the list is a guy who's married to a nice black lady from Nigeria. They have 4 interracial kids. Apparently, he's now a racist. There's he left his own in his fit of psychiatric episode. His psychiatric episode following the recent days. This part of this public mental illness, he left his own name on it, and ironically, because it was my list, my name wasn't on it. Now, of course, you look at his page and what you see is what he is. This white guy with dreadlocks. You know what a white guy with dreadlocks is? That's the whip of the slave master. That's what that is. That's a symbolic whip. I'm taking your culture. I'm appropriating your Jamaican culture, your West Indian culture. That's what a white guy with dreadlocks is. That's his whip. Get out there. Bring me back virtue. Bring me back smugness. Bring me back sanctimony so that I may pontificate and preach upon others with my hair dreadlocks. And his clothes were like something from a toddler's clothes. Like a little boy. That's why he's not a man. He'll never be a man, and that's why he does what he does, and that's why he needs virtue. He needs virtue to compensate for the one thing he'll never be, a man. And this is always the great thing about that was when he posted it to his wall, most people were disgusted and revolted by his behaviour. They said you're the fascist. Making a list of people, compiling dossiers. The tolerant left, compiling dossiers. It hasn't changed since the Bolsheviks and the NKPV and the Pol Pots and the rest of them. He's got his little black book there of enemies of the state. And the hilarious thing was it backfired terribly on him. Terribly. And why shouldn't it? That's not normal behavior. That's not decent behavior. But it doesn't matter because he has his plantation where he sends out he has his Black Lives Matter badge. So that means he has his plantation. Go out there, black people, and bring me back virtue from my plantation. Bring me back smugness. Bring me back sanctimoniousness. That self-righteous sense of me being better than everyone else because I have appropriated an African hairstyle to make me feel like I'm an amazing man. Because inside there is nothing. A void of inconsequential responses. That's what's inside you. And that brings us to the main theme of this video. We're going to discuss further on the people have no internal world. I want to say thank you to John Waters and on Computing Forever for giving me a shout out about this. It's a touchy thing that we have to deal with here because we don't want to be stigmatizing people. I don't want to be stigmatizing people, or any of us, who are just a bit thick. There's a big difference between them and people who don't have an inner world. You can be quite thick and be a lovely person. I know lots of people from growing up in Ballymun who are thick as shit, but they're nice people. Now, our hearts are good. Now, so the internal world thing, this is because there's no self-reference. You see, there's a great thing you can compare them to without the vindictive violence, although that does sometimes appear, is the dissociation found within borderline females. Borderline females work between idealizing and love bombing, and then absolute hatred, wanting to destroy them when the relationship is over. In between that, they operate in a world of being terrified of being abandoned. So it's this kind of like things like Trump hysteria, Trump derangement syndrome, and that kind of behavior. A lot of that is about being fear of abandonment. As well as a big thing of that the people who think they're wonderful because they're virtue signaling all the time will abandon them, will see through how false and fake it is and abandon them. And this is where the rage and hysteria comes from. And so this dissociation has to be built in order to protect their psyche from basically looking in the mirror and doing their shadow work. It's, you see, this is, and you don't only get this on on the personal level, you get it on on the mass level as well. I'll give you an example. The Irish people, 3,000 Irish people marched in the streets next to each other, totally breaking uh, social distancing laws for the Lives Matter thing in America, yet they wouldn't march for the lockdown doing stupid things like and evil things like what's happening to the old people in the residential homes that are basically murder houses at this point. They don't do anything like that. So it's easier to. It's like a family. It's like, you remember do you ever hear that thing like the House Devil Street Angel? Now the House Devil Street Angel is a very interesting phenomenon because that's an extreme form of dissociation. He will cause misery and chaos and hardship among his own family. But to all the neighbours, he's a wonderful man, and he's the first to help them with their problems, because that comes from, it's easier for him to pretend to be solving someone else's problem than actually rolling up his sleeves and solving the problems present within his own home, within his own uh, domicile environment. And you had that with the Irish government having a minute's silence for Black Lives Matter the other day, but not caring about the old people who've been killed through incompetence in the residential homes, and also the disaster facing the economy. Oh no, no, those things would require work. Those things would require effort. Those things would require admitting mistakes and coming to the shadow side of themselves. Oh no, it's much easier to try and pretend that you're involved in solving the problems of something that's thousands of miles away. And that's where that comes from. All that is a projection of not wanting. This dissociation comes out of this projection of not wanting to deal with the immediate issue at hand within you, and rather projecting it to an imaginary resolution or solving of the issue that exists at the macro level. And therefore, you've compensated for the inability to solve the issues within inside yourself or your community, your own home, by projecting them upon an idealized sort of like macrosphere where you're a hero, you have virtue, and you want people to know you have virtue. When these people are reminded of their own failings at the micro level, they have the same reaction as a borderline female. They go into extreme rages. They go into extreme hysterical, violent rages because they cannot reconcile the two partitions of dissociation of surrounding these issues within their cognition. One side is black, the other side is white. One side is positive, one is negative. One is up, one is down. One is an orange, one is a lemon. One is a motor car, one is a bicycle. They cannot be resolved. They cannot be resolved. So therefore, the schism that creates within their cognition causes a derangement and a hysteria and a wild lashing out at others. True, and the engine that drives it, well, shouldn't they, that the engine that drives it is their inability to self-reflect and do shadow work on themselves. But the fuel that drives it is always a self-righteous belief that others have to be punished for not being as perfect as they are. And that's really what it comes down to. And so when you see all these whites, like there's a picture of a little, it's one of the saddest fucking things I've ever seen. A picture of a little girl, it looked like it was probably in England, in a doorway, holding up a sign, pointing at herself, and she's white privilege. She looks like she'd been slapped and told to hold the sign. She also has filthy socks, and her clothes look a bit disheveled. So the mother's probably an alcoholic or a drug addict or just a dirtbag who sits around all day neglecting her kids that she's had from all different fellas. And so, but in order to not deal with that, she takes her child and uses her child as a commodity in the same way that these people use black people as commodities for their own virtue signaling, and uses them because it does not deal with the matter at hand, and the matter at hand is too difficult to solve. So we then project it into a kind of fantasy at the macro level where it can be resolved but not solved, and it's a very different thing. So, you know, you see this kind of thing all the time, and it's very common in humans, and we've all done it probably at some stage in our lives. But it's It's really, really bad now because of the NPC. I'll take a swig of coffee. The NPC thing. Now, the NPC thing is a multi-complex faceted thing, like anything to do with human behavior and human social and cultural dynamics. You cannot say pigeon it down to something simple as like simple buzzwords. That's another thing. These ones who are dysfunctional on the inside, they need these simple phrases, these simple buzzwords, as social distancing, Black Lives Matter, uh, save the planet. Remember that's a great one. They save the planet because it's easier to save an imaginary world by watching and sharing a Greta Thunberg speech that she's reading that her parents wrote than it is for them to actually save their own inner world. You see, it's all about that. This is enlightenment. This is all the philosophical schools going right back to the ancient Taoists, the symposiums of ancient Greece. Even the Druids would have been like this. It would have been all about this thing of attaining enlightenment through the inner journey, the secret journey, the quest within. This is why I value things like the tarot so much, because the archetypal symbols in the major arcana allow us to walk into ourselves as if we are a landscape and examine that landscape internally through the concept of visual imagery rather than through the acquisition of memes. Like the regular memes and, idiosyncrasies, inclinations, and so on that we have adopted from our cultural programming and our social need to survive as social animals. So this is why these people don't have that. Now, this is why it's become increasingly detached. Now, there's a purpose for this. I believe an evolutionary purpose. I'll give you an example, right? I stopped going to rock concerts, and I am a huge music fan, around 2009, for the simple reason that I started to realize that the reason why people were holding up phones to film when you go to see a band, and this is a band that maybe from England, from America, from anywhere, Canada, and they're here in your country, and you want to see them because you love their records, and you want that live sound and that energy of the crowd, and they're all half the crowd are holding up camera phones, and they're filming what's in front of them, because I started to realize that there was no difference between what they were seeing on this screen and what was on that stage. It was the same thing. So therefore, they became these were people because of things like third level education, the internet. Now, when people are going to say he's knocking third level education robs your ability to think internally because you're too busy trying to appease the professors. It's as simple as that. I'm sorry. Studying to pass a test, while impressive, is not a symbol of enlightenment. It's not a symbol of growth in terms of your cognition and your enlightenment and your consciousness. It's merely passing a test and doing what you're told. And by the time you read a master's at PhD level, this is you basically you cannot it's very difficult for you to think yourself. Your cognition switches off because you have to pass the test of life. This is why people who left, as John Waters said in that interview on the other day on Computing Forever, he said the most intelligent people he's ever known were his parents' generation, who all left school at 11 and 12. And that's the same. I meet farmers around that left when they're leaving their intercert, which is like 13, 14 around here. They're the most intelligent people I know. And it's just how it is. I'm not saying there's something wrong with you going to university if you want to study. If you're studying a degree where your passion is in it, you'll probably be okay. But the problem is with so many people go to university these days, it's really a high school or secondary school plus. They're not in there because they're following a passion of something they're genuinely interested in. They're in there to do a degree because everyone else has one. And they have to get it at any cost so they can get that civil service job where there's no requirements made from them for the rest of their lives except sit into an office and rot and get till they get their pension. Now, This is when I started to notice it, that what was on the screen in front of them at the rock concerts was more real eventually than what was on the stage in front of them, and that this dissociation then took on a new level. Okay, so they partitioned reality from virtual reality, and in virtual reality you don't do much thinking. In reality, because of the survival skills necessary to, get by in life, you do need to use your cognitive awareness, your spatial awareness, things like your emotional intelligence. And how these function mainly is because of the mirror neurons in the frontal cortex of your brain. These are what create the social, what's the word, understanding within your environment and others. Is also the fact that the brain is not lateral. There's the two hemispheres are, one is slightly longer than the other. This one of the theories behind this, I kind of agree with it, is that it's because we have to understand, not only as humans, not only what's in front of us, what we're hunting, say our ancient ancestors, but also a peripheral awareness. Now, what's happening is, I think because people are going further into social media, that the partition that's created between reality and social media, that partition is now widening to the point where the things that they would use their mirror neurons for social intelligence, the mirror neurons are probably dying, and they're probably not getting enough usage, and therefore this is probably where the NPCs are coming from. They're more this is the video world, the TV world, the media world is far more real to them because they have less interaction with the real natural world. And this is why they're all environmentalists, because Greta Thunberg says so, but none of them go for walks in the countryside. They don't observe auguries or animals or the migration of birds. But they're all ardent environmentalists because they saw a public service announcement by David Attenborough. The disconnect happens there, and that's what I think is happening now. That's why, some of those people, I'd imagine, who put those squares up on Black Lives Matter are probably some of the biggest racists in their real life. This is always a phenomena of this dissociation. And I've always noticed that so many liberals I've known talk about my black friends this, my black friends that. There are no black friends around them. These might be someone they worked with, or someone they met, or someone they knew who was black, casually, but they weren't friends. Where someone like me who doesn't go on like that. No, I'm not right wing or left wing. I'm absolutely apolitical, so it's nothing to do with anything like that. I've loads of black friends, always had. Don't care. Again, I judged them. Why? Because of the content of their character. I wouldn't even know. Half the time, I wouldn't even know they're black. I mean, this is the whole thing. I think a lot of this has to do with many things going on, but I think ultimately the extreme catalyst is the inability to tell the difference between computer life through social media and reality. And they've switched off their mirror neurons and they've gone into this world where thinking is done for them, and where their dopamine receptors are constantly are now becoming hyperactive because they need virtue. They need to be told they're wonderful all the time. So, like, I've nothing against a beautiful girl who puts her pictures up on Instagram and is proud of that she's worked herself out and she made herself look great, completely harmless, right? But the problem is people, that's there's nothing wrong with that kind of harmless vanity. There's nothing at all with that. I mean, but that vanity has now been extended, not from a beautiful girl or a guy who's good at sport or something like that. That vanity has now been extended, or a fella in a band who's like a heavy metal guy or something. It's now been extended to, I deserve those accolades for agreeing with an easy concept. So the dopamine. So what's happened, I think, with these people is their dopamine receptors are hyperactive because they're constantly seeking accolades off the internet. If you cut off their supply, like that guy who reported my entire, what you call it, fans group. I don't like the word fans, supporters club, as all being Trump right wing bigots. What had happened, his dopamine receptors had been interrupted. He went into dissociative rage, and then put the list up like a crazy Bolshevik back in the 1930s with a list of enemies. It's so interesting, right? He's basic. What people like them are, they're drifting out of reality. They're falling out of the world, and this is the good thing now. Uh, don't be negative, and I'll tell you why it's not negative. Yes, you see the videos of those awful scenes of violence and vandalism and theft and robbery and just unhappiness. A lot of the faces, the eyes of those young people are unhappy. It doesn't matter if they're black or white. They're dying. Those people are becoming extinct. You have to remember, for every one of those dead-eyed, vicious, white liberals who's putting a brick through a window of some black person's shop in America, for every one of them, there are 50,000 sitting at home who are not like that. These are what I would call the conscious ordinary Joes. They're sitting at home and they know that that's not right. They don't protest. They don't scream on the internet because you will find that they're still cognitively connected to the spatial environment of the everyday world rather than the dopamine feeding world of the virtual signaling internet, of social media. They are sitting at home and they are not getting involved yet. So you have a situation where, say in the alternative community, they're saying the world is fucked. Look at it, it's all full of these SJWs who virtuals. Nah, they're a tiny minority. They're not the majority. The majority at home is the conscious ordinary Joe who has the ability to step into a higher level of consciousness, an enlightened consciousness. But for lots of reasons, he or she has to take care of their kids, fit into society, can't shout out too much because the kids go to Irish dancing lessons or the kids go to soccer practice or this parent-teacher meetings. So they have to play the game. They have to go along. But that doesn't mean that they're agreeing what they're seeing on the television with those, like, say, the acts of violence you're seeing in America and vandalism and anger and hatred. They're not going along with that yet. And the politicians and the mass media have made an enormous error by assuming, in a kind of an hyper elevated squeaky wheel syndrome, that these people that we see at these Black Lives marches and stuff are the majority. They're not. 3,000 marched in central Dublin. Okay? Dublin is a population, the Greater Dublin region is a population of nearly 2 million people. So that means 1,997,000 people didn't take part. Among them, and that's in one European capital city, are tens of thousands of ordinary maybe hundreds of thousands of ordinary conscious Joes who see it and go, they didn't social distance, they're hypocrites. But they don't go around boasting about it on the internet. They carry what we talk about with a quiet dignity. These will be the foot soldiers of our second renaissance. It's early days yet. What's going to happen is, you have these people, they're decent, well-meaning, they look after their families, they work hard, they don't riot, they don't get caught up in virtue signaling, they do what they think they need to do to make life better for everyone, their families, etc., their kids. These people are going to find out in the months ahead that they don't have a job because of the lockdown. That the same civil servants who made these laws, doing stupid things like saying work at home, but they couldn't go to computer shops if their computer broke down because they were considered non-essentials, because these civil servants didn't think that people working at home on a computer might need to use computer stores and repair places. And these are the kind of things. You mean, I stayed at home, I did social distancing, I stopped my kids' soccer practice, I stopped my kids' Irish dancing classes practice. My kid loves playing guitar and I couldn't bring his guitar teacher over. And he lost interest in guitar and all he does now is sit around playing video games when he was really loving to play the guitar. You're telling me now that we did all these things And you have left us with a destroyed economy. Now, they won't march in the streets, they won't smash things, but they won't forget. They'll give the globalists, they gave the globalists one chance with the pandemic. They're not going to give them a second chance. And this was how our tribe will grow. Our tribe will grow not by shouting and screaming, not by protesting and voting, but by osmosis of shared experiences. That's what will happen. And I guarantee you, in a year from now, this will be a very different situation. Now, it doesn't matter to the politicians who were caught flaunting the social distancing laws. They'll all be retired collecting their big fat pensions in some globalist think tank. Their gaslighting will be irrelevant. They'll leave a new generation of politicians to deal with it. Now, these politicians will try and use the same templates and framework that we've dealt with this bullshit. It won't work. Like I said, they gave the globalists one chance. They're not going to give them two. And you're going to find that the lack of creativity that these NPC and dullard gaslighting politicians and globalists and high-ranking civil servants have used to create this absolute catastrophe of the pandemic, you will find that they won't have a plan two. And what you will see then is huge numbers of people saying to their families, you know what, we're on our own. They really screwed us over. We did everything they asked of us, and they didn't have any contingency plans. In fact, the Irish government went back to work this week with one very important contingency plan to save Ireland, and that was to reduce the age of consent of children having sex changes without their parents' permission. The people at home won't riot, they'll remember. The people at home won't smash shop fronts, they'll remember. The conscious ordinary Joes at home won't be bought off next time, they'll remember. And you're going to see these trickle of groundswells of people who are apolitical. Remember, people who voted for Trump didn't vote for him because he was a conservative or a Republican. They voted for him because he wasn't a politician. And you're going to see these apolitical people stepping forward and without these political philosophies and dogmatic approaches, and just getting business done. And that's why Trump is attacked so much, because he represents a means of managing a nation without having to have a philosophical heritage rooted in some political dogma. And this absolutely terrifies Western politicians. Not so much Eastern politicians, because they're democracies are relatively new, but Western politicians, where you have dynasties of families in a certain political party, they are terrified. Or right down to councillors who get their jobs, kids, because they vote Labour and things like that. Just you wait. Another aspect of this was the Trump hexing. Those people who hex the Trump just hex themselves. You don't hex people who didn't do you personal harm. And what we're seeing is the madness imploding. Yesterday, we had tremendous weather anomalies all over US cities. Oakland, Philadelphia, they were being reported everywhere. Massive clouds, Miami. This was the psychic tension. The weather is affected directly by human conscious behavior. Willem Wake totally proved that with his cloud busting experiments. Our emotions affect the weather. That's why you always had the analogy of somebody who's a sad sack and glum having a dark cloud drawn or illustrated with a dark rainy cloud over them. This is the people who don't have the song in their hearts. That psychic explosion that we saw yesterday was the ordinary conscious Joes at home who don't get upset, who don't riot, who don't want to leave a bad image of themselves among their children, who don't exploit their own children for virtue signaling or getting back at people. Those weather anomalies were a direct effect of them sitting at home going, this is bullshit. And you know what? It is bullshit. But this is it. You look at the history of the Middle Ages, this is exactly what it was like. It was exactly like this. It was a mess. Everything was falling apart. There was autocratic governments. The feudal system was out of control. You had a handful of people ordering everyone around. Other ones, and everything was a mess. Nothing works until you had managers come in. You had a resurgence of things of the past. People slag off the like of the Medici family. The Medici family were almost like the Trumps of their day. They said, okay, this is bullshit, let's fix the place up. And that's why they built Florence and hired all these artists and got the country, got Italy kicked off again, and with that they got the rest of Europe kicked off again. They subserted the popes who didn't want the Italians to find out about their pagan great past, where the cities had sanitation, unlike they didn't have in the Middle Ages. You had the Medici families built sanitation. The popes lost their power. That's why the popes were furious, and the bishops, because these powerful families said, "Let's get Italy working," and that's why the Medici's legacy has lasted, and that they were managers. They were managers, and this is what makes human life worthwhile. Not political philosophies or religious dogma, but this is really what anarchy is. Anarchy is not smashing places up. It's managing society without a philosophical leadership structure just to make it work for the best betterment of everyone else. We are watching that. When you look at those what's going on in America right now, you're looking at the dying screams of a failed world that the neocons have lost control over. Wait and watch. The ordinary conscious Joes are coming out of the suburbs, the streets, the villages, the small towns, the factories, and the farms, and they're coming to join our tribe. I can promise you that's on its way. Love yous all.